Mahatma Gandhi said, our greatest ability as humans is not to change the world, but to change ourselves. Welcome to the Guyana Dialogue. I'm your host, Shamisa Ali, and it is a pleasure to be here with you this evening. Good evening to everyone joining us on Facebook and on YouTube. Our topic tonight is allegations of corruption and the public procurement process. The Guyana Dialogue is being sponsored by a coordinating council of Guyanese based in the US, UK, Canada, Guyana, and the Caribbean. Funding support is by well known philanthropist Dave Narayan from Dave West Indian Imports. Please welcome my moderator for tonight, uh, Professor Muniram Budu, and our
Hello.
panelists. Good evening,
Yeah.
Professor Muniram Budu, and our panelist tonight is Dr. Gangaram Das and Dr. Vishnu Bisram, who will join us shortly, and possibly Dr. Tara Singh. Our guest tonight is a financial analyst. Please welcome Mr. J.C. Bhagwandin. Welcome, everyone. Good evening.
Hello, good evening, Shamisa. Good evening, everyone out there. Thank you very much.
Right?
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me.
Perfect. Dr. Vishnu, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, good evening, all. I hope you're hearing me now. We have some technical issues. Joel Bagwandin is no stranger to public commentaries in Ghana, a prolific writer and commentator who has appeared in many programs. I would say one of the few specialists on oil and gas in Guyana, and of course on other issues as well. There is virtually no issue that escapes his commentary. Welcome, Joel, and the others. Joel, I was just thinking. You want to give a little background about how the procurement process works?
Well, so thank you for having me. Thank you for that kind and humbling introduction. Just on a point of correction, I am no specialist in oil and gas. So I just wanted to clarify that. A background on the procurement process. So to put it simply, without being too complicated, the procurement process is governed by several pieces of legislation and regulation. And as it currently stands, in terms of the legislative and regulatory framework, it's a very rigid process. Now, there are different methods of procurement in accordance with the Procurement Act. So, for example, you have a different methodology of procurement for consulting services. You have a different method of procurement for um, construction and goods, things like that. And the most popular method of procurement that is used is the public tendering process, where you go through the bid, competitive bidding. Suppliers or contractors submit their bid, they go through a rigid evaluation process. And then you have other methods such as selective tendering based on different threshold, based on different limits, and based on different criteria and the nature of the item or the service being procured. So generally, the procurement, I would say, to give a background, the procurement process, the public procurement process in Guyana is governed by a a relatively rigid set of regulation and procurement legislation. And of course, in the institutions that you have that carry out these functions, you have the National Tender Board, you have regional the regional agencies. They do conduct their own procurement based on certain limits. There are ministerial tender boards that conduct procurement based on a certain limit. Above a certain limit goes to the National Tender Board to be administered. And then you have the Public Procurement Commission, which is a constitutional body where I sit as a commissioner that is independent of the executive, independent of the tender board, and we report to the National Assembly. And the function of the Procurement Commission, the main function, to summarize that, is it is an oversight body for public procurement to ensure that the public procurement process is functioning as it should, that it is effective, that procurement practices is being carried out in accordance with the law, with the procurement regulation, conduct training, and of course make recommendation for legislative reform, etc. It is also a body where suppliers, persons or entities that participate in the procurement process, if they have a grievance, if they are not happy with the outcome of a particular tender, they have recourse to the procuring entity, whichever procuring entity that is, and there are procedures to be followed, that to be invoked and followed in how you participate in that grievance process or register that grievance process to solicit a response or some sort of feedback. Then, then after that level, you elevate to the level of the Public Procurement Commission, and you can lodge a complaint, you can ask for an investigation, you could ask for an administrative review, and of course, based on those outcomes, the Procurement Commission would make certain recommendation for remedial uh, action or remedial recourse. Of course, within the parameters of the procurement law and the procurement regulation. So I wanna stop there for now, and I'll leave the floor
Okay.
open for
Just
questions.
for clarification, the number of members on the board and who appoints them.
The
I mean,
which one of the board?
the com-
The sorry.
the PPC, the Public Procurement Commission, the number of members
Okay.
who appoint them.
Okay. All right. So thank you for that. But let me just state a brief disclaimer that um, I don't want to give myself too much liberty to speak on behalf of the Public Procurement Commission. The authorized person who could speak on behalf of the Public Procurement Commission is the chairperson. I am not the chair. I'm just a commissioner, but I can certainly speak to issues and some of the work of the commission based on what is already established within the public domain. Um, so, in terms of your question, constituted of five members, five commissioners. The members go through a rigid constitutional procedure in how they're appointed. So, firstly, the position is advertised, persons apply. Uh, the Public Accounts Committee, which is like a subcommittee of the National Assembly, is the committee that is tasked with the responsibility for the selection and of the candidates. So we went through that process. We would have had to apply. I think in our in our this current constitution, you had about 30 applicants, 30 more than 20. I can't remember the exact number, but there were more than 20 applicants that was then shortlisted down to the five. The Public Accounts Committee then take that five and make a recommendation. It then goes to the National Assembly. The National Assembly has to approve the five nominees to be appointed, and that approval is no less than a two-third majority of the National Assembly. So that means both sides have to basically approve the five nominees. Following the approval by the National Assembly, the commissioners are then appointed and sworn in by His Excellency the President. So we were sworn in, we went through that process, and we were finally nominated and by the National Assembly, approved by the National Assembly, and appointed by His Excellency in uh, July 2nd, 2022. Right. So this year this year would be how much years? But 2 years. We're appointed for a 3-year term. So
Mm.
our term would expire next year, July. We would have completed 3 years.
And it's only one term. You serve only one term.
We serve only one term in accordance with the Constitution. Yeah.
Yeah.
According to the Constitution, we could serve a second term, but not consecutive terms.
And
So you'd
and
have to, yeah.
and just for clarification, for public purposes, so anyone who has a grievance can complain to the Public Procurement Commission for an investigation, but
Right.
the Public Procurement Commission does not take direct remedial action. Can only recommend remedial action.
Correct. Yes, we can't. We don't have the legislative powers to take action. We could only make recommendation.
Okay, so over
Yeah.
to you, Rambudu.
Um, Joel, you mentioned that you have very rigid rules for the tender and procurement, and I agree with you. But there's another issue here is about the application of these rules and regulations. Do you believe that they are applied rigidly, ethically, and is there accountability?
Okay. So from the position where I sit, and as I've just established, in a few days we will have completed 2 years in that, as commission, having been appointed as commissioners, and we have done some decent amount of work in terms of, apart from complaints coming in, we also do compliance review outside of people making complaints or contractors making complaints. So that allows us to make an assessment of the entire public procurement system. And we are required to submit an annual report to the Minister of Finance. We are in the process of finalizing the first such report, which will be submitted to him very shortly. We have I'm going through the work we have done, and then I'll answer your question for public consumption. We have recently tabled our annual report because we report to the National Assembly. So we do so by way of an annual report on all the activities, report on all of our activities for the year, for the period. So we have recently submitted our first report for the first year that we cover to the National Assembly, which will be tabled in the next sitting of the National Assembly, whenever that time comes. And we're in the process of now starting our second report for submission by maybe the fourth quarter of this year, covering the second year. So we've done a decent amount of work from which my opinion that I'm about to share in answering the question is framed or is formed, the basis of which of it. The application of the procurement rules, um, based on some of the matters that we have examined and some of the matters that we have concluded, and those reports are publicly available on the Commission's website. We have found that they have not been rigidly applied in some cases. We have established that there were breaches in some cases of the Procurement Act, etc. And of course, we would have recommended um, remedial actions therefrom, now, or thereof. Now, outside of that, where we have found breaches and where the evaluation criteria, for example, were not rigidly applied, outside of that, we would have done, in terms of a sample size, a percentage relative to the sample size of compliance reviews that we have conducted. We have also found quite a number of transactions, that specific transactions that were in compliance, that had no issues. So yes, you have breaches, you have cases where The rules are not rigidly applied. In some cases, you have plausible explanation or plausible circumstances, which is understandable. I'll get into that in a few moments. But they're also based on the work that we have covered. Based on the work that we have covered, there is also a high level of compliance, right, where we have found no major issues or deviation, etc. Now, bear in mind that we have a limitation in terms of capacity and the volume of transactions on a daily basis, the volume of contracts of procurement being done on a daily basis. What we have covered is a fraction, is a minuscule fraction of the total, right? So if we want to use that small sample, it is to reasonably say that this is what applies across the board. That is subject to debate and different views, etc. But this, what I'm saying to you to answer the question, is based on the work that we have done thus
Mhm.
far, right?
All right. Now, let me follow up on that. The news media, and in fact, including the ministers of the government and the vice president, have regularly report on contractors' transgression of all sorts, from poor quality work to no work. If not corruption, what are they? Why are there so many transgressions? And as you say, they might be minuscule, but the way it's being presented is that there's a lot of corruption going on, and there's a lot of default from contractors. Are you aware of the availability of data to do any analysis of these transgressions?
So that is another function, which is another function of the commission, which comes under monitoring, um, and monitoring contracts that are implemented. But that is also a function of the procuring entities. Most importantly, it is a function as an oversight body, and it is a function of the procuring entities as well. Now, you're asking me a very difficult question. The reasons for the infractions and deviations in terms of execution, etc. Uh, the answer could be very subjective. My view, based from where I sit and from my experience outside of where I sit as a commissioner, in terms of as an analyst and as someone who is involved in the business sector as well, I think we have generally, because of the pace of development, we have serious limitations in terms of capacity and capability, which we have to build. So let me put that in a broader context. I would argue and in fact demonstrate, and we have, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we have made this point having in one of our reports having recognized it, that our budget right now, our national budget, is $1.15 trillion. That is budget 2024. Just about 5 years ago, the national budget was a fraction of that, was less than a third of that. Just if you go back way back 10 years ago. So when you compare and you put into context the volume of contracts today being carried out today compared to just 5 or 10 years ago, it's a vast increase. There was a time when the system was handling and designed in its as currently constituted or currently composed, to handle hundreds of contracts. Now the same system, is overwhelmed with executing thousands of contracts across the country. So execution, both on the part of the public administration, the public sector, as well as the capacity and the capability of contractors, is a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge that we have to contend with. So that largely is my view in terms of the reasons for some of these infractions and deviations and the difficulties we're having in terms of execution. Not to say I'm not making an excuse, however, or making any denial whatsoever that you don't have elements of corruption or elements of wrongdoing or deliberate wrongdoing. That's a different matter, and that is a matter for a different authority to deal with outside of my jurisdiction, or our, if I should say, our jurisdiction where I sit as a commissioner at the PPC.
Yeah. Now, who sets the evaluation criteria, the contractor's qualification experience for, say, construction work, and who does the evaluation?
So there is a standard um, bidding document which include the evaluation criteria. That document was designed by the National Tender Board, right? So there's a standard bidding document. Up to today, the vice president addressed this matter and he spoke to the very things that I'm about to say here. So with those standard bidding document in place, individual procuring entities can't come up with their own evaluation criteria. They have to they have to conform to the established standard bidding criteria. And there are three different standard bidding documents for different threshold, because as I explained earlier, you have different procurement methodologies there that are tied to different thresholds, etc. So there are about three different types of different variation of procurement based on threshold limits. So all the procurement entities have to be guided and adopt that. If any procuring entity wants to um, add a criterion or take out a criterion, they can't legally do that. If they do that, then that is a breach of the Procurement Act. The Procurement Act prescribes that in any such circumstance where a procuring entity wishes to add a criterion or additional criteria or remove a criterion or criteria, then they have to apply to the National Tender Board and have that approved, right? That's the only way it can be done. So who sets this? The the National Tender Board sets this. The Procurement Commission also has a function to review these bidding documents. So based on the work that we have done, and some of the recommendations that we have made where we found deficiencies in the regulation and deficiencies in the act, we're coming out with a comprehensive, and very soon, very shortly, the public will have the opportunity to see some of these recommendations in to a greater extent in our annual report that is submitted to the National Assembly. What I'm talking about in greater detail. So we also have a function to review these documents, and right now we are in the process of reviewing these documents in collaboration with the National Tender Board.
Yeah. One last question before I pass you on, and I'll come back later on. You know, why? I understand there's some issue with regards to the support facilities for the defense force, which there was an infraction regarding the criteria. Why did the procurement commission allow this to be evaluated, right? When obviously there's an infraction.
So let me explain. So
Mhm.
let me clarify that the Procurement Commission is not involved in evaluation,
Mhm.
right? We are not that body. That commission is not involved in the evaluation process or even the administration of the entire process. We have oversight. So the
Mhm.
procurement commission only got involved because one of the contractors that participated in that bid felt that the company that it was awarded to, they felt that that company did not meet the criteria. And so they presented their case to the Public Procurement Commission. And so that is how the Public Procurement Commission then went ahead and having received that complaint and request to review that, and so the commission was not involved in the evaluation or in any way.
Mhm. Okay, Dr. Bishram?
No, well, let's move on to Professor Ganga Ramna.
Mhm.
Well, thank you very much. I thank Joel for giving us a clear picture of the process. It appears that the process meets international standards. However, there's many a slip between the plate and the lip, as my colleagues have asked questions around. So I too would join and ask similar questions, especially qualifications of the principal contractor and the financial capacity, which would should involve the use of bonds, performance bonds in these contracts, and also the possession of tools, equipment, and other records of accomplishment. How do you see those cases that you have evaluated so far measure up along these lines?
So thank you, Professor Ramdas, and you are correct. You are correct, and I would like to echo what the Vice President said only today, that the system that we have in place is a rigid system. What we need to do, when I say we, well, we are doing our part as the Public Procurement Commission, but we in terms of the administrators, the procuring entities, the government administrators, is to enforce, to adhere to the Procurement Act, to adhere to the rigidity of the evaluation criteria, to minimize these deficiencies. So what is needed is more adherence. It's not that it is absent, it is there, but we need more adherence. Let me also acknowledge that while we are independent from the executive, we do monitor, we do engage with the executive, with the various ministries, for example, the Attorney General, the Ministry of Finance, particularly the Ministry of Finance when it comes to the tender administration, because the NPTA board falls under the purview of the Ministry of Finance. So we engage with them, right? And from that engagement that we have with them, which is on a working basis, an ongoing basis, as well as the executive's public uh, warning in terms of what they're doing, and signals that the steps that they're taking and measures that they're taking, and considering to strengthen the system in terms of having greater adherence to the procurement procedure and the Procurement Act, etc. So let me also acknowledge that in response to the question. Yes, there are deficiencies, but we have to address it. We have to minimize it by ensuring that there is stronger adherence to this, and the executive, they're doing their part in terms of coming up with ways and measures to ensure that. Insofar as the Public Procurement Commission is concerned, what we have recognized, to help in that regard, is from when we engage with the various entities, we do training. That is one of our constitutional functions, training. We recognize that a lot of training is needed. A lot of persons in the system, they don't know the Procurement Act. They don't know They they don't know it as well as they should. They don't know the procedure, etc. So we're ramping up our training as well. All of that are part of the initiatives we independently carrying out, and of course the government, they're taking their own steps and measures to remedy some of these issues, to remedy these issues.
Okay, Dr. Voodoo.
Okay,
Oh,
so if I may, just for clarification or explanation, so there is a certain limit, as Mr. Bhagwandin explained, at which there must be tendering. I don't know if it's 3 million or whatever, but there is a limit above which there has to go to a tendering process. Certain items are not tendered because if there is an emergency, I mean, God's sake, if there's a flood, they can't go tender it and wait for bids to
Yeah,
come in.
well, the Procurement Act provides for those
Right.
circumstances. Yeah.
So the system also allows, as you explained and pointed out, that if there is a complaint, if one is not satisfied with how his bid or tender was evaluated, then they can file and for not a complaint or a review by your PPC in for remedial recommendation, not action. So the process exists. The question is, does the process work? And I was wondering if you could just address that.
So before I address that, I want to add that in addition to the Public Procurement Commission, where they have an institution, an independent institution for recourse to address grievances, etc. If they're not happy with our report or our conclusion and recommendation, they have another recourse. They could go to ultimately the courts, right? And take up the matter there. There is another layer in accordance with the Constitution, but that is not implemented as yet. It's called the Public Procurement Commission Tribunal. That is another layer, another independent body that is above the Public Procurement Commission, but that has not yet been um, constituted. But notwithstanding that, in the absence of that body not being constituted, you could go straight to the court. So I just wanted to add that for the public's benefit, the viewers' benefit. So now let me address the question. Could you help me to understand when you say the process is working? Could you elaborate a little bit more for me to understand what
Right.
process
So
you're
so
referring
so
to?
so some company complained to you, and
Mhm.
I don't like what they're doing. I don't like their conclusion. I don't like their report. So they go to the next step. Do they go to the court? Do they feel that they have received justice from you and the court, or you're not aware of further action that was taken?
I am not aware of further action, neither am I aware of any complainant not being happy um, with our report. So far, I'm not aware of any. And of course, based on the peculiarity of the case, there are times where we may advise the complainant that you have these are the other recourse that you could invoke, right? But so far, I'm not aware of any bidder or any contractor not registering dissatisfaction with our reports.
And going on to the court.
Correct. Yes, I'm not aware of any.
Now, the subheading of tonight's discussion is also corruption. So I was just wondering, um, have you yourself seen any evidence of? I don't want to use. I don't like the word corruption, but gross violations that really should have been avoided. And that's one question. Second question: Do you think the tender board um, follow the process as laid down by the law?
Well, from our engagement with the tender board, I think there is that commitment to full compliance with the process. there is that commitment, and there is that recognition that there is need for tightening up in some areas. Um, I I can't say
And
anything
and when
I can't say anything beyond
and when
that. Whether it's difficult to conclude, it's difficult to come to the conclusion that a violation of the Procurement Act is equivalent to an act of corruption. It's difficult to make that conclusion. Of course, you have allegations of corruption. Now, and allegations of corruption, and as you know, the public know, there are many allegations of corruption in within the public domain. But there is a different procedure and a different agency to deal with allegations of corruption, which is outside of our mandate,
hmm?
right? Our mandate is really to investigate, ensure compliance, and whether there has been irregularities in the system, etc. Not because there is irregularity means that that is deliberate. That is a different matter. To make that determination, you got to go through a different process of investigation. That is a matter for the police. It's a matter for maybe the auditor general, and maybe a matter for the court, because you got to now present evidence. You got to cross what's the word you use in um you got to summon witness and all. That's a whole different thing. So I agree with you for not wanting to use the word corruption, um because that is not how you it's not a simple thing to establish that there is corruption because you had a breach, right?
does the tender board accept and do they implement some of the recommendations from the PPC?
Yes, in fact, I can give you an example. Perhaps a very good example to the question. You would recall, and the public is well aware, that there was this big controversial contract involving the award of a pump station to a well-known individual, um, and that was a matter that was brought to the commission by a sitting member of parliament, a political party, not an aggrieved party or a supplier, but anybody could. And the way the constitution is designed, anybody could file a complaint to the commission, and the commission is obligated to entertain that complaint. So the commission undertook to investigate that matter. The matter was concluded. It was this that matter was the subject of public debate, engaging public attention by many sections of society, particularly within the political space, as well as some known political and controversial commentators. It dominated the public domain for a long time until the matter was concluded. And after it was concluded, and when we finally concluded the matter and put the report out in the public domain, none other than the Minister with responsibility for finance, Dr. Ashley Singh, who is the subject minister for the tender board for public procurement, put out a statement accepting the report, welcoming the report, accepting the recommendations for remedial action, publicly undertaking to incorporate those recommendations aimed at strengthening the system and preventing recurrence of those deficiencies.
Okay, Professor Bodu.
Yeah. I want to follow up on this issue about corruption. I know Professor Bistram doesn't want to use that word, but I'm using that word in a general sense, which means also conflict of interest and everything that's included in it. Now, can the evaluation criteria in a construction job, for example, which for the qualification experience of a contractor, which has to be written by an engineer for a particular job, right? Can that be written to favor a particular contractor?
Well, it has to be guided by the established
Mhm,
standard bidding document, which includes the evaluation
yeah.
criteria.
Mhm.
So the sh- the answer is maybe yes, they can, but whether it's legal, that's a different matter. And I would say um, legally you cannot.
Yeah.
Legally, if you adhere to, if you apply the procurement law and you apply the regulation strictly, then that would be minimized. That cannot happen.
Mm. Well, that's an issue for ethics, I think. It's the
Yes.
ethics of the person who
Yeah.
writes it, you see.
Correct.
And I
Yeah.
think in my feeling, that's a big issue in Guyana. Not only Guyana, elsewhere also. You know, you mentioned about training. So if you want to stymie corruption in public procurement, and I think corruption always follows public procurement, whether it's in Guyana or elsewhere. You mentioned that you're doing staff training here. So you have to have well-trained staff, and those staff must be able to be trained in ethics. And I think that's an important issue. Do you guys train your staff in, in relation to issues on ethics?
So it's interesting that you make that point, because we received a request from the Ministry of Governance, the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance, to conduct that type of training. And they did ask if that is part of our training. It is included in the training, but maybe one or two slides in the general training. But when the request came from the ministry, we deliberated and we recognized that, maybe this is something that we should expand on. And it's something that we're prepared to do. And the ministry itself, the Ministry of Governance, is doing that, and they've already started rolling out. We received some correspondence not so long ago. I think up to today, I saw some correspondence that the Ministry of Governance is taking the lead in that regard when it comes to the generally the anti-corruption framework for the public sector for the country. That is the ministry with charged with that responsibility, and they're leading exactly what you have asked, the question that you posed, rather, in terms of ethical training in public offices and so on. So they've coming out with a series of activities, roundtable discussion, training, etc., through that ministry. So very good, very good that you raise it. It's
Mhm.
something that is already
Now, one of
activities
the
being
things I'm aware of to stymie corruption in public procurement, especially where you have a lot of technical matters in the contract, is to have peer review of technical specification, contract technical and legal requirements, and contractors' qualification experience. And so these are done by independent people, so like a second pair of eyes are being looked at it. And there's a lot of data collection, right? So people can look, and these are easily accessible to the public, and accountability are enforced. Now, in your recommendation, the PPC is making a recommendation to improve things in the public procurement. Are you considering any of these?
peer review.
Peer review.
It's not, well, thus far, no, we have not. um we haven't considered. That's a good suggestion that you have me now would want to exercise my mind on it.
Mhm.
Something definitely worth considering, but in terms of practical implementation, immediately when you mention peer review, my thinking is whether we have the human resources to do that, because we already have a shortage of human resources to do the first review, the first evaluation, and to get a second tier of review to do peer reviews. Currently, that would be difficult in terms of the availability of human resources. But in terms of considering that whether it's in line with international best practice and so on, certainly something that we can exercise our minds on.
Yeah, but I think you can't limit yourself to the people in Guyana because this world now is actually integrated, and you can get people any part of the world to do some of those peer review. But what I'm also I want to ask, and I think I did ask it, but you didn't address it. Data collection. It's important for the public to have data on contractors who defaulted and the type of default they have and historical price unit variation because you have engineers estimate that is going in these contracts. How do these engineers arrive at these? What are the historical price
Mm.
variation? Because there's a lot of unethical things could happen there. I'm aware of some of those things in my years of practice that can happen in these estimates.
So I'm a data driven person, um, particularly in my profession and what I do as an analyst and so on. I am big on data and data collection. Generally, generally we have had we have rather a big gap in data collection. That's a huge gap, a huge deficiency nationally, right? The Bureau of Statistics. I recently had a meeting. I'm doing some other work um, that I had to engage with the Bureau of Statistics, and they're doing a lot of work. They're rolling out a lot of program in terms of addressing, improving data collection and putting out different types of analyses and reports and so on. Specific to us in the area of procurement, public procurement, we are collecting a lot of data because constitutionally we have procuring entities. They have to submit certain reports, procurement plans, and a whole bunch of stuff. And of course, we are building a repository of a database of information, useful information that you know we're currently equipping the secretariat to process that and to do more analyses and so forth, to do exactly what you're suggesting there in terms of data collection.
Mhm. Are any of these data available publicly? Because just
Not
before
as,
coming on this
not as
show,
yet.
I went to the
No,
NPPA
not as yet.
website
Yeah.
and I can't find anything there. It's a very poor
No,
website, by the
no, not as yet. All of that,
way.
it has to
Mhm.
be addressed, right? So no, currently the type of data that you're asking and you're speaking about, that is not currently available in the public domain. But if you ask me if we're doing anything about it to have this sort of data put in the public domain, yes, definitely.
All right, let's hear from Professor Ganga Ramdas, and then Shamisa will close off.
Yes, I'd like to go down to some concrete example here in the much publicized Tepui um, uh, pump station report. Did you have a case report on Tepui contracts?
Yeah, that report is available publicly. It's on the Public Procurement Commission's website.
So, were there any complaints or failures in from that report?
Yeah, yeah, there were. That was the exact case example that I referred to in my response to a previous
S-
question.
So then, how did we end up giving a second contract to the principal contractor without experience relevant?
So that I can't answer that because I don't have the file. It's not at the procurement commission, so I can't give you an answer to that.
And it's not there is no complaint as yet anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I
the
could speak to the matters that we have concluded. But how the question that you're posing, I'm not in a position to answer that because
Well, that means that the process is flawed because you're not able to detect some of these failures and shortcomings. So we would need then a set of field inspectors that would generate the specific kind of data that you need to go back and correct situations as they arise. I think that should be a major responsibility of the PPC as well. What do you say?
yeah, definitely. We the again, if we're constrained with resources, human resources, that is. It is part of our function to go out in the fields and do monitoring. Um, but of course, like I said, there are thousands of projects ongoing across the country, and there is only so much that we could monitor based on the resources that we have at our disposal.
Well, you mentioned statistical bureau. That the functions of the statistical bureau were kind of minimized. They don't generate all the reports on production and all the national accounts in details that they should have produced. And the other thing is there were some interference with their work a few years back, and they even wanted to relocate it somewhere behind Ogle instead of being in the center and close to the Ministry of Finance and so on. So those are some process shortcomings which should be addressed, just like all the things that you've observed. We need to go back and look at institutional capacity and see where it is lacking. There were much international aid to strengthening institutional capacity in the public sector. What has happened to those money? They were inefficiently spent or switched into other areas. We need to go back and see how these monies and investments affected institutional capacity and what things should be done to avoid some of these failures that we're observing from the system. So I know you might say, yes, you agree, but can you be a little more specific?
Well, you're speaking broadly of institutional capacity. I know of a few specific that I can speak to that is well documented in the public domain. For example, as Dr. Bisram introduced me earlier, which I denied being a specialist in oil and gas, but I've been writing extensively on oil and gas matters and the public policy in that sector, covering public policy, providing analyses, and using that sector as an example. There a lot of institutional there are a lot of resources that we have received support from, for example, the International Monetary Fund, to improve our capacity to conduct audits. The Guyana Revenue Authority has been the beneficiary agency of those institutional capacity activities aided by the IMF. Are we seeing the results of that? Yes, we are seeing the results of that because we're seeing an improvement in the issues we're having with our cost recovery audits are detected by the Ghana Revenue Authority. That is a positive indicator that the institutional capacity that they have been benefiting from, the resources expended, is have been yielding positive result. And of course, we have to continue along that line. That is one example. There are other institutions, other agencies, the Ministry of Natural Resources, for example, they're building out their capacity in that regard. So I wouldn't say that we're receiving support for institutional capacity and we're not seeing results. Maybe if you look at it, maybe you have not been seeing it, but from where I sit, I'm seeing it. Specific to the Bureau of Statistics, I am not aware of that, what you have referenced, that there was some issue a few years back. I've never heard of that, but I can speak to what is currently happening. I know that they're doing a lot of work. They're also receiving a lot of support from external agencies to improve their capacity, both in term institutionally, human resource, technology, etc. Um, what has happened with the Bureau of Stats? So they have been considerably occupied with finalizing the most latest census report. So that is why you're not seeing anything much coming out from them. But they have been consumed in doing a lot of work, and there's a lot of things happening with that agency in terms of institutional capacity, strengthening institutional capacity. I could give you more examples, more specific examples, but I think I made the point.
I think we have reached a time limit, so I don't know if Shamisa would like to close off.
So,
Yes.
just one quick point here. You need to look at the capacity for monitoring and reporting in the gold and in the oil sectors specifically. That's where you have billions of dollars. The Statistical Bureau has its statutory functions. I think they're doing well with that. But the new activities that are taking place, the new discoveries of shortcomings in the gold sector and in the oil sector, we don't have the platforms that Guyana can control, and ordinary civil servants can understand and access. Those are serious deficiencies, and it's being overlooked and tolerated.
No, it's not overlooked. The president, the vice president, as well as the attorney general are all on record of recent outlining a regime of measures, initiatives, including legislative reforms that are being considered and will be undertaken in response to that, to addressing those deficiencies. So they're not being overlooked. They're not being overlooked.
Uh, Thank you, Dr. Gangaram. That sounds like we need auditing to,
Lisa,
sounds like what you're really asking is maybe they need an auditing panel to do some of the work. Thank you, Joel. We will now ask you for your closing remarks.
Well, my closing remarks. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Um, this is a very esteemed panel as usual, who have far all each one of you gentlemen here have far more pedigree than I do. I'm a student to you all, and it's a great privilege always to be amongst this panel, and to be, on this side of the panel answering questions. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to our entire panel, even though you guys were a little bit harsh tonight. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you to all of our viewers and to all of you out there. Have a pleasant evening. This is the Guyana Dialogue. Until next time, see you soon. Bye bye.
thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
Joel.
very much. Thank you.
Good evening.